In this animation, you will see how check constraints and triggers work together to enforce data integrity. Check constraints are defined on a table and run when a user makes a change to records in that table. The check constraint runs before the insert or update statement and validates the data being entered into the table. If the data fails the validation, the check constraint can cancel the change before it is written to the database. Triggers also perform data validation on tables. Triggers are a special class of stored procedure that execute automatically when an update, insert, or delete statement is issued against a table. When a user makes a change to a table that has a trigger, the trigger runs after the insert, update, or delete statement executes. The trigger can reference data in the table and in other tables in the database to validate the change made by the user. If the change violates data integrity, the trigger can roll back the change and cancel the attempted data modification. Although triggers and check constraints both implement data integrity, triggers can enforce restrictions that are more complex than those defined with check constraints. Now, let's look at the difference between triggers and constraints. The first difference between triggers and constraints is that constraints are proactive while triggers are reactive. Constraints are checked before an insert or update statement executes. Triggers are executed after an insert, update, or delete statement is executed on the table in which the trigger is defined. Thus, the constraint is checked before the trigger runs. If constraints are violated, the statement aborts and the trigger does not execute. A second difference between constraints and triggers is their scope. Check constraints can only validate changes being made in one table and cannot make other changes to the database. Triggers can reference columns in other tables to perform more complex data validation or to cascade a change through related tables. For example, when a user orders a book, a row is inserted into the Order Details table. An insert trigger on that table can determine whether or not the book is in stock and can create an entry in the Back Orders table if it is out of stock. So, in this animation, you saw how check constraints and triggers work together to enforce data integrity.